Good evening and welcome to the channel's studios here in London with your international news around the world in 5. Israel's army says it has seized Gaza's Rafah crossing with Egypt after continuously bombarding eastern Rafah overnight. Tanks moved in on the area, a vital entry point for aid, a day after Israel ordered civilians to evacuate the area. Truce talks, meanwhile, are to resume in Cairo after Israel said terms which Hamas had agreed to were unacceptable. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejected it as far from Israel's basic requirements. The country's war cabinet voted to continue operations in Rafah, but is, however, sending a delegation to the talks in Cairo. Vladimir Putin has officially been sworn in as Russian president, marking the start of his 5th term in office. The lavish ceremony marks his 3rd consecutive and 5th overall inauguration as president. However, lots has changed since he was first sworn in, where he pledged to preserve and develop democracy and to take care of Russia. 24 years on, the Kremlin leader is waging war against Ukraine, and instead of developing democracy, Mr. Putin has been curtailing it, jailing critics, removing all checks and balances on his power. His new term, the 3rd consecutive time he has been elected, will take him up to 2030. Rescuers in South Africa are searching for survivors after a 5-story apartment block under construction collapsed, killing 5 people and leaving at least 50 trapped. Officials in the city of George, Western Cape Province, say 26 people have been pulled from the wreckage and taken to hospital, but there were dozens more workers on the site when the building collapsed. The cause is under investigation. Video footage taken nearby showed a huge cloud of dust as the building fell. At the scene on Tuesday morning, emergency workers were taking it in turns to work the small site, removing concrete blocks and debris by hand.
We're trying to get water into the people. So those are the kind of steps that we have to follow. And then from tomorrow, we'll start bringing in heavy equipment to start lifting up all the collapsed structures. But at the moment, as long as we're hearing life, we have to focus in that with our rescue teams.
Local authorities say the death toll from the heavy rains that have caused flooding in Brazil's southern state of Rio Grande do Sul has risen to at least 78. Massive flooding and landslides triggered by days of heavy rain. Nearly 25,000 residents have been forced to leave their homes since the storms began last Saturday. At least 500,000 people were without power and clean water, with further rainfall expected. Australia's Prime Minister says it was unacceptable for Australian defence personnel to be put at risk in international airspace by the Chinese military as they took part in an operation to enforce UN sanctions on North Korea. The Chinese Air Force J-10 jet dropped flares above and several hundred metres ahead of an Australian MH-60R Seahawk helicopter on a routine flight on Saturday in the Yellow Sea as part of an operation to enforce sanctions against North Korea. Anthony Albanese said China had not yet responded publicly to Australia's representations over the incident.
Australian Defence Force personnel were going about their job in international waters, but also in international skies, to support the United Nations in the sanctions that they have against the North Korean regime. That is part of Australia being good global citizens, and Australian Defence Force personnel should not be at risk whilst they're doing that.
Boeing's first crewed spaceflight has been postponed just 2 hours before launch for a safety check. That's according to NASA. Astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams were already in position inside the Starliner when the decision to halt was made because of a potential issue with an oxygen relief valve. The spacecraft had been expected to blast off from Cape Canaveral in Florida and make its way to the International Space Station. The soonest a new launch attempt may be made is on Friday. The mission has already been delayed for several years because of setbacks in the spacecraft's development. And the current Miss USA has said she is relinquishing her title to prioritise her mental health.
Noelia Voigt, Utah.
24-year-old Noelia Voigt won the beauty pageant last year and represented the US at the Miss Universe competition in El Salvador in November. Posting on Instagram, she said, "In life, I strongly value the importance of making decisions that feel best for you and your mental health." And that's your international news around the world in 5. Now back to the channel's studios in Lagos.